July 2nd, 1937, 8:43 a.m. Somewhere over the Pacific Ocean. A woman's voice crackles over the radio. "We are on the line 157-337, running north and south." Those are the last words anyone ever hears from Amelia Earhart. She and her navigator Fred Noonan are flying a Lockheed Electra, attempting to circumnavigate the globe at the equator. They're aiming for tiny Howland Island just north of the equator in the central Pacific Ocean. A 2-mile-long speck of land in the middle of nowhere. They can't find it. The visibility is poor. Radio transmissions between the plane and the USS Itasca, a Coast Guard cutter waiting at Howland, are garbled and sporadic. Earhart's voice grows increasingly strained. They couldn't find Howland, however, and despite many attempts, no one has been able to find them since. The U.S. Coast Guard and Navy scoured the area by ship and plane for 2 weeks. At the time, it was the most extensive search and rescue mission in American history. They found nothing. A court order declared Earhart legally dead in January 1939, 18 months after she disappeared. And for 88 years, the world has been obsessed with one question. What happened to Amelia Earhart? But here's the thing, that's the wrong question. Or at least, it's not the only question. Because focusing solely on how she died obscures the more important story. How she lived. Amelia Earhart wasn't just a woman who vanished mysteriously. She was a pilot who shattered records, a writer, an advocate for women's rights, a celebrity who used her fame to push boundaries, and a person who refused to accept the limitations society placed on women. She disappeared while attempting something extraordinary. But she'd spent her entire life doing extraordinary things. This is the story of Amelia Earhart. Not just the mystery, but the woman, what she achieved, why she mattered, and yes, what most likely happened on that July morning in 1937. Amelia Mary Earhart was born July 24, 1897, in Atchison, Kansas. From the beginning, she didn't fit the mold of what girls were supposed to be. She wore bloomers instead of dresses. She climbed trees. She collected insects and frogs. She built a homemade roller coaster in her backyard and rode it down, crashing spectacularly. When adults told her such activities were unlad alike, she ignored them. Her childhood was unstable. Her father struggled with alcoholism. The family moved frequently. Money was tight. But Amelia developed a fierce independence and a conviction that she could do anything boys could do. During World War I, she worked as a nurse's aide in Toronto, caring for wounded soldiers. The experience exposed her to suffering and resilience, shaping her worldview. In December 1920, at age 23, Amelia attended an air show in California. She paid $1 for a 10-minute plane ride. "As soon as we left the ground," she later wrote, "I knew I myself had to fly." She took on multiple jobs to pay for flying lessons, working as a file clerk, photographer, and truck driver. In 1921, she bought her first plane, a bright yellow Kinner Airster biplane she nicknamed the Canary. She cut her hair short, both practical for flying and rebellious for the era. She bought a leather jacket and slept in it for 3 nights to make it look worn, so other pilots would take her seriously. In 1922, she set her first aviation record, flying to 14,000 feet, higher than any woman had flown before. But being a female pilot in the 1920s meant constant skepticism. She wasn't just breaking records. She was breaking barriers in a field that didn't want women. In 1928, Amelia received a phone call that would change her life. Publisher George Putnam was looking for a woman to be the first female passenger to cross the Atlantic by air. He chose Amelia partly for her flying credentials, but honestly partly because she looked like Charles Lindbergh, who'd made the crossing solo the previous year. Amelia crossed the Atlantic in June 1928 as a passenger, with pilot Wilmer Stultz at the controls. She kept the flight log and helped with navigation, but she didn't fly the plane. She became instantly famous. Ticker tape parades, magazine covers, celebrity status. But she hated being celebrated for something she hadn't actually done. "I was just baggage," she said, "like a sack of potatoes," so she decided to do it properly. On May 20th, 1932, exactly 5 years after Lindbergh's flight, Amelia Earhart took off from Newfoundland in a single-engine Lockheed Vega. She flew through storms, mechanical problems, and ice formation on the wings. The plane's altimeter failed. Flames shot from the exhaust manifold. The weather was brutal. 15 hours later, she landed in a field in Northern Ireland. A farm worker approached the plane. "I've come from America," Amelia told him. She became the first woman to fly solo across the Atlantic. The second person ever after Lindbergh. She was 34 years old. The achievement was monumental. President Hoover sent congratulations. She received the Distinguished Flying Cross, the first woman to receive it. She was an international celebrity, the most famous woman in America. And she used that fame deliberately. Amelia wasn't content to just set records. She used her platform to advocate for women's advancement. She encouraged women to pursue careers in aviation and other male-dominated fields. She spoke at universities, wrote books and articles, and became a visiting professor at Purdue University, counseling female students on careers and life choices. She helped found the 99s, an organization for female pilots that still exists today. She designed a clothing line for active women, practical, comfortable clothes that allowed freedom of movement. She married George Putnam in 1931, but on her own terms. She wrote him a letter before the wedding outlining her conditions. She wanted to maintain her independence, her career, and her name. She continued to be known as Amelia Earhart, not Mrs. Putnam. She set multiple aviation records. First person to fly solo from Hawaii to California, first person to fly solo nonstop from Mexico City to New York, altitude records, speed records. But it wasn't enough. She wanted one more challenge, the biggest one. In 1936, Amelia announced her intention to circumnavigate the globe at its widest point, the equator, a 29,000-mile journey that would be the longest flight ever attempted. Purdue University purchased a Lockheed Electra 10E, a twin-engine plane, specifically for the attempt. It was equipped with the latest navigation and communication equipment, the best technology 1937 could offer. Amelia chose Fred Noonan as her navigator. Noonan was experienced, a former Pan Am navigator who'd helped establish many Pacific routes. Some sources suggest he had a drinking problem, but there's no evidence he was impaired during the flight. The first attempt, in March 1937, ended in a crash during takeoff in Hawaii. No one was seriously injured, but the plane needed extensive repairs. The attempt would have to wait. On June 1, 1937, Amelia and Noonan took off from Miami, heading east. They flew to South America, across the Atlantic to Africa, then to India, Southeast Asia, and Australia. Earhart and Noonan embarked on a 29,000-mile around-the-world flight. The journey was grueling. Long flights over water, difficult weather, mechanical issues, exhaustion. But they made it. By late June, they traveled 22,000 miles. They were only about 5,000 miles from completion when Earhart reported by radio the plane was low on fuel. By June 29, Earhart and Noonan had landed in Lae, New Guinea, and had just 7,000 miles of their journey left to go, all of which would be over the Pacific Ocean. One more leg. Lae, New Guinea to Howland Island, a tiny speck of land in the vast Pacific. Then on to Hawaii and home. On July 2, 1937, the pair departed Lae on board their twin-engine Lockheed Electra and headed for Howland Island to refuel. They would never make it. The flight was always going to be challenging. Howland Island is tiny, less than 2 miles long, barely visible from the air. Finding it required precise navigation and good radio communication with the USS Itasca, which was stationed there to assist. But the radio communication was problematic from the start. Owing to radio problems, communication was sporadic and broke down. The Itasca could hear Amelia, but she apparently couldn't hear them. They were sending her directional bearings, but she never acknowledged receiving them. "We must be on you, but we cannot see you," Earhart told the nearby USS Itasca. "Fuel is running low. Been unable to reach you by radio." Her transmissions became increasingly urgent. She reported flying on a line 157 over 337 degrees, a navigational line that ran through Howland. She was looking for the island, but couldn't find it. Earhart's final communication to the Itasca was sent at 8:43 a.m., roughly 20 hours into the flight from La, New Guinea. "We are on the line 157-337, running north and south." Then silence. At the time, it was the most extensive search and rescue mission in our country's history. They finally called it off after about those 16 days, about July 18, 19. Ships and planes from the U.S. Navy and Coast Guard scoured some 250,000 square miles of ocean. They found nothing. No wreckage. No oil slicks. No debris. No bodies. Amelia Earhart and Fred Noonan had vanished. Theory 1. Crash and sink, most likely. After the largest search and rescue attempt in history up to that time, the U.S. Navy concluded that Earhart and Noonan ditched at sea after their plane ran out of fuel. This crash and sink theory is the most widely accepted explanation. This is the simplest explanation and fits all the evidence. Earhart's last transmissions indicated low fuel. They couldn't find Howland. The weather was poor. Navigation was difficult. Radio communication had failed. They likely flew past Howland without seeing it, continued searching until fuel ran out, then ditched in the ocean. The plane sank quickly in the deep Pacific. Their bodies were never recovered. In its official report at the time, the Navy concluded that Earhart and Noonan had run out of fuel, crashed into the Pacific and drowned. This theory is supported by the fact that, over 3 expeditions since 2002, the deep-sea exploration company Nauticos has used sonar to scan the area off Howland Island near where Earhart's last radio message came from, covering nearly 2,000 square nautical miles without finding wreckage. But that's because the Pacific is vast and deep, and finding a plane is extraordinarily difficult even when you know approximately where to look. Theory 2. Nikumaroro/Gardner Island Castaway. The International Group for Historic Aircraft Recovery, TIRE, believed that when Earhart and Noonan couldn't find Howland Island, they continued south along the 157-337 line some 350 nautical miles and made an emergency landing on Nikumaroro, then called Gardner Island. According to this theory, they lived for a period of time as castaways on the tiny, uninhabited island and eventually died there. Evidence supporting this theory. Radio bearings tracked on signals emitted in the wake of the plane's disappearance appeared to have crossed in the vicinity of Nikumaroro. Bones found on Nikumaroro in 1940 were sent to Fiji, where they were assessed by a medical doctor as being male before going missing, though recent analysis of the measurements suggests they could have been Earhart's. Artifacts discovered by TIRE on Nikumaroro have included improvised tools, an aluminum panel, an oddly cut piece of clear plexiglass, and a size 9 woman's cat's paw shoe heel. In 2020, researchers looking at satellite imagery identified a visual anomaly known as the Taraya object in a lagoon on Nikumaroro. Problems with this theory. U.S. Navy planes flew over Gardner Island on July 9, 1937, a week after Earhart's disappearance, and saw no sign of Earhart, Noonan, or the plane. Multiple expeditions have searched Nikumaroro extensively without finding definitive proof. The artifacts could be from other sources. Nikumaroro was briefly colonized and had shipwrecks. Theory 3. Japanese capture, unlikely. The Japanese capture theory suggests that Earhart and Noonan, after failing to reach Howland Island, were captured by Japanese forces in the Marshall Islands or Saipan and held as prisoners. This theory was popularized in the 1960s and has been kept alive by anecdotal accounts and supposed photographic evidence. An upcoming History Channel documentary claims to reveal an archival photograph showing Earhart and Noonan alive on a dock in the Marshall Islands. But this was thoroughly debunked. Japanese blogger Kota Yamano found the original source of the photograph in the National Diet Library digital collection. The original source was a Japanese travel guide published in October 1935, meaning the photo was taken before Earhart's flight and couldn't be related. A common criticism of all versions of the Japanese capture hypothesis is that the Japanese-controlled Marshall Islands were considerably distant from Howland Island. Getting there would require flying hundreds of miles in the wrong direction. There's no Japanese documentation of capturing Earhart, despite extensive post-war access to Japanese military records. No physical evidence, just stories and wishful thinking. The most probable explanation remains the original conclusion. They ran out of fuel and crashed into the Pacific. The Nikumaroro theory is plausible, It's possible they made it to Gardner Island and survived briefly as castaways. But without definitive proof, it remains speculation. Until that wreckage, or some other definitive piece of evidence, is found, the mystery surrounding Amelia Earhart's final flight will likely endure. 80 years on, the mystery surrounding her disappearance, and the excitement around solving it, has hardly waned. Why are we still obsessed? Several reasons. She was famous. Amelia was one of the most recognizable people in the world in 1937. Celebrity disappearances fascinate us. The circumstances are dramatic. Vanishing over the Pacific while attempting a record-breaking flight around the world. It's inherently compelling. There's no closure. No body, no wreckage, no definitive answer. Humans crave resolution. It's recent enough to feel solvable. Unlike ancient mysteries, this happened in the age of documentation. Surely modern technology can solve it? But focusing only on the mystery does Amelia a disservice. It reduces her to a disappearance, not a life. Amelia Earhart was the first woman to fly solo across the Atlantic. Fly solo nonstop from coast to coast across the United States. Fly solo from Hawaii to the U.S. mainland. Receive the Distinguished Flying Cross. She set numerous altitude and speed records. She flew farther, faster, and higher than women were supposed to be able to. But her achievements went beyond aviation. She advocated for women's rights and opportunities. She encouraged women to pursue careers, education, independence. She challenged gender norms simply by existing as she did. Women must try to do things as men have tried, she wrote. When they fail, their failure must be but a challenge to others. Amelia understood that her fame gave her a platform, and she used it deliberately. In an era when women were still fighting for basic equality, they'd only had the vote for 17 years when she disappeared, Amelia demonstrated that women could achieve anything. She wasn't just breaking aviation records. She was breaking the ceiling of what society believed women capable of. Every record she set, every flight she completed, was an argument for women's equality. She knew this. That's why she kept pushing, kept attempting more difficult challenges, kept refusing to be satisfied with what she'd already achieved. Beyond the icon, beyond the records, beyond the mystery, who was Amelia Earhart as a person? She was funny, self-deprecating, thoughtful. She wrote beautifully. Her books and articles show a woman who was introspective and articulate. She was brave but not reckless. She understood and calculated risks. She loved flying for the pure joy of it. The lure of flying is the lure of beauty, she wrote. She had fears and doubts but pushed through them. She failed sometimes. The first attempt at the world flight crashed. She got back up and tried again. She was a whole, complex human being, not just an icon or a mystery. On July 2nd, 1937, somewhere over the Pacific Ocean, Amelia Earhart sent her last radio transmission. Then she vanished. We don't know exactly what happened in those final moments. Did they ditch in the ocean? Did they make it to an island? We may never know for certain. But here's what we do know. Amelia Earhart lived 39 years. In those years, she shattered records, challenged conventions, advocated for women's rights, and inspired millions. She refused to accept limitations placed on her because of her gender. She flew higher, faster, and farther than anyone thought a woman could. She disappeared while attempting something extraordinary. But her entire life had been extraordinary. The mystery of Amelia Earhart's disappearance has obscured the meaning of her life. We focus on how she died and forget how she lived. She didn't fail on July 2nd, 1937. She'd already succeeded over and over again. The world flight was one more challenge, one more attempt to push boundaries. That she didn't complete, it doesn't diminish everything she accomplished. The most difficult thing is the decision to act, Amelia once wrote. The rest is merely tenacity. She decided to act, to fly, to challenge expectations, to refuse limitations, to live on her own terms. That's the legacy. Not the mystery, but the life. Not the disappearance, but the achievements. Not the unanswered questions, but the inspiration she provided and continues to provide. Amelia Earhart showed that women could do anything men could do. She proved it with every record she set, every barrier she broke, every convention she challenged. She's remembered for vanishing over the Pacific. She should be remembered for refusing to stay grounded. Somewhere in the Pacific, whether at the bottom of the ocean or on a remote island, lie the remains of a Lockheed Electra and possibly two people who attempted something most would never dare. But the real Amelia Earhart isn't lost. She's in every woman who refuses to accept limitations, every person who attempts the impossible, every dream that seems too big but gets pursued anyway. She disappeared on July 2nd, 1937, but her legacy took flight long before that, and it's still soaring.